Good afternoon, Ms. Dickson.
Good afternoon.
Sort of familiar, but on the other side here, right?
Yeah, a little different.
Why don't you, and make sure you don't talk too close to the microphone because we're getting a little feedback.
Okay, just give me let me know if I am. I'll try
Well,
not
they're
to.
telling me we are, so
Okay.
I'm trying to play sound engineer and chairperson here.
All right.
Why don't you start with your opening statement? Go ahead.
All right, very well. I feel obliged to say, may it please the commission. My name is Jean Dickson. I am an attorney with the law firm of Betty, Newman, and McMahon in Davenport, Iowa, where I just celebrated, I don't know if it was a celebration, but just passed my 25-year milestone with the firm. Before I get into my, I guess, formal opening statement, I always have the advantage or disadvantage when I come out to when I come out to Des Moines. Some of you from out of state, you have a couple hours of road time. So I thought of a story. In 1988, I was starting my senior year at Luther College. I had finished an internship in Washington, D.C. that I'll touch upon a little bit in my opening statement later. Had made the determination after spending a summer in Washington, D.C. that I didn't want to spend the rest of my life out on the East Coast. Came back to Iowa. Was finishing up finishing up my senior year at Luther. I was the student body president, and I'd been asked to speak at the local Rotary group. And I always remember so I gave a little talk at the Rotary group, and I made a comment about how I wanted to stay in Iowa, and I got a standing ovation from a bunch of Rotarians in Decorah, Iowa. And that's always sort of been part and parcel of my career and why, above and beyond so many other things, I am a true blood, true and true Iowa lawyer. And I come to you today with my presentation and giving you my spiel as an Iowa lawyer, wanting to serve other Iowa lawyers, wanting to serve the Iowa public, wanting to serve the judiciary. Like an oral argument, and I apologize if I get to, I apologize to the lay people, but like an oral argument, you have your briefs, you've seen my application, so I'm gonna try to touch upon some things that aren't necessarily in my application. So I grew up as a professor's kid in Northfield, Minnesota. Divorced parents. My father died last spring, and my mother will celebrate her 79th birthday, and she still works full-time as a practicing psychologist. My father's tuition reciprocity benefit brought me to Luther College, where I majored in English and political science and also secured a minor in Spanish. I used to be fluent in the language, but sadly, that's dissipated somewhat. While I was at Luther, I was the student body president for 2 years, and I also served as a student representative for the Board of Regents. Like many political science majors, I opted to go to Washington, D.C. for a summer in 1988. I took an alternative route. I didn't go work on the Hill, but instead I did public policy research for a think tank called the American Enterprise Institute, where I did research on government, politics, economics, social welfare issues. Went to law school. Everybody that's here in front of you today obviously went to law school, so I won't touch upon that too much. I think that's in my application. After law school, I came to Des Moines, where I was a law clerk for the Iowa Court of Appeals. And I have to apologize because my geography is a little off. But what's interesting is I worked over in that building there, because as I understand it, this building was built in 2003. So when I was on the Iowa Court of Appeals, I worked over there in the state capitol. The configuration of the courts were a little different than, I think there were 6 Court of Appeals judges and 9 Supreme Court justices. If my history is a little off for that, I apologize. So I worked with the Court of Appeals as a clerk for Judge Barney Donaldson, who passed in the mid-90s. Our caseload was different than the Supreme Court. I did about 8 to 10 orals or non-orals a month. Obviously there was no email, there was no electronic files, there was no voicemail. So we were in a cubicle, and every month the clerk's office would literally bring 8 to 10 records to each of the clerks, with the blue briefs and the blue briefs and the red briefs and the appendix. But what I always remember is I'd have the entire record, and I always made an effort as a law clerk for my judge to always read as much as I could of the record. And one of the first things I would always do would be to take the transcript and read the entire transcript front to cover, so that no matter what, even if it wasn't as part of the record, I'd have that background that I could assist the judge in reviewing and writing the opinions. I kind of feel like I've grown up here, but what's really fantastic is some of the clerks that I clerked with for the Iowa Court of Appeals, and even got to know the Supreme Court clerks pretty well. I still consider some of my closest colleagues and friends, and still from time to time might call upon them for advice or legal advice, or even more, I guess, professional responsibility advice. So my interest in research and writing really goes back to the 1980s when I majored in English and political science. And when I left the clerkship and went into private practice in 1993, in the very back of my mind, I always thought that someday this would be something that I would like to pursue, and that I would hope I would have the talent set that I can contribute to the state by way of given the opportunity to serve on the Supreme Court in an appellate position. Also, I touched upon this in my application, but I served on this commission from 2005 to 2011, and my service included the task of coming up with the replacements. I know Mrs. Sinclair and Justice Wiggins were there too with the replacements due to the unfortunate non-retention election in 2010. So I estimate that I've probably participated in more than 100 of these interviews, but honestly, this is the first job interview I've personally had in over 25 years. So it's much different. So as an attorney with Betty Newman and McMahon, again, know some of this is in my application, I currently focus on workers' compensation defense and also continue to handle appeals. My profession involves defending employers, insurance companies, and the litigation which ensues when an employee is injured at work. It's not a traditional courtroom with a black robe judge or jury, but my work still involves representing live people, small companies, big companies. I've represented over the course of my career pretty much any kind of employer you might want to identify. So I've been to pork plants, I've been to big factories, I've been to farms, I've been to small garages with 2 or 3 employers. I've represented roofing companies, restaurants, schools, all those different facets of employers. For me, my clients are real people. They are owners of businesses, they are managers, they are people just like you and me that have bills to pay, and many times the business, albeit if they're a manager and owner, that's their lifeblood. So my work involves meeting with the clients, preparing them for trial, working them through, which for most people is kind of a one and done. A lot of people have only go through the litigation process once or twice in their lifetime. So I worked through that. I meet with doctors, experts, I develop evidence, take cases to hearing, write post-hearing briefs, and handle matters through appeal. My legal work has also included many matters outside of workers' compensation. Again, I set forth in my application, I've done a tremendous amount of appellate work. Primarily when I started, I had the background in the Court of Appeals, and I've always liked to research and write. So as a consequence of that, I've landed a lot of those types of projects. As a young lawyer, and even I made partner in 2000, and even after becoming partner, I handled a number of appeals for other partners who would, quite frankly, rather be doing other things than writing briefs. You have the application in front of you in terms of my appellate background, the trial experience. If you look at paragraph 20, I'm all about visual exhibits or whatever, but if you look at paragraph 23, see, that talks about trial experience. And when I sat down to do the application, you answer the question that's in front of you. So I was not able to put down the jury trial experience I've had, because quite frankly, it's not been in the past 10 years. So I've had some limited, but I had a federal jury trial. I've had a few second-chaired some trials, but they were not within the last 10 years. So therefore, they're not identified in that particular paragraph. It goes without saying that all the applicants in front of you have a love for researching and writing and have that experience and that skill set, or quite frankly, they wouldn't be here today seeking this position. So my task, I think, is to try to convince you why I might be set aside from the other 21 applicants. Like I said, I feel like I've sort of grown up with the courts, and in some respects, when I started over there, I was 24 years old. But my experience has been also with the administrative side of the courts. So in August of 1998, I was asked for the first time to grade the Iowa bar exam. Drove out to Des Moines with my 9-month-old daughter in the car, came out here, she stayed with her grandparents, and I graded the bar exam for the first time. I've graded the bar exam, and now I'm on the Board of Law Examiners for a total of 20 years, or a total of about 40 tests. For those of you that aren't familiar with the bar exam, and I'm gonna try not to spend my 25 minutes explaining the bar exam, what we mean by grading the bar exam, we read a detailed question, a black letter law question, on a myriad of topics. I work with 2 graders, or I used to be a grader, now I oversee it, but there's 2 graders that grade the exam and give it a score of 1 to 6. They come out twice a year. Mr. Gray has been gracious enough to devote his time to do it. It's sort of a labor of love, but it's been a fantastic process for me, not only because of the opportunity to read and write and do that sort of that black letter analysis, but especially since I do so much workers' compensation. Twice a year, I've met so many great contacts of lawyers that don't practice workers' compensation, lawyers that are city attorneys, attorney generals, family law lawyers, you name it, the whole gambit. And I get an opportunity to work with those lawyers and not just the workers' compensation lawyers. When I was on the Board of Law Examiners, it was the same thing, when I was on the Nominating Commission, it was the same thing. I remember during that period of time, I tried to put myself, especially made an effort to, for example, I went to the Iowa Academy seminar in February, so I could get to know other lawyers, kind of get to know some of the applicants that were going through that process. So for 20 years, I've worked side by side with lawyers who are not necessarily all litigators or defense lawyers, and for me, that's sort of the essence of the administrative side of the court, that you're working on rules and developing procedures that affect all members of the bar and not just one practice over the other. And I don't mean to understand that I do, Justice Wiggins, everything that you do administratively, but my understanding would be that you're coming up with global rules that, again, that would affect everybody more or less equally. Finally, the other, I guess in my introduction, what sets me apart from maybe other applicants, and I apologize because I've met with a lot of you, so somebody asked me this question, and now, of course, I can't remember who it was, so, but somebody pointed out to me that there's really 2 main reasons that you might be here today seeking a position with the Supreme Court. Is it public service or is it a higher calling? And I have to be completely honest that for me, it's more the latter. That I'm really here because it's something that I've always aspired to do. I think I have the skill. I think my resume speaks for itself in terms of public service. I have been president of the Scott County Bar Association, president of the Iowa Association of Workers' Compensation Attorneys. Excuse me, I'm currently serving on the Bettendorf Civil Service Commission, and I'm also currently on the Pleasant Valley School Board. So I've done that, and again, if you look at the 22 applicants, everybody has tremendous public service. But again, for me, if you look, and I know I met with Ms. Pearson last night, and we were talking about kind of paragraph 9 and paragraph 10. Paragraph 9 asks you about why you want to be in the court, and paragraph 10 asks you what you can bring to the court. And for me, paragraph 9 was so hard because it's sort of hard to sell myself, like, why do I want it? I know that that's important for you all, but really it's what can I bring to the court? And for me, this is something that I've always kind of wanted to do. Again, it's not like every time there's been an application or a vacancy that I've decided, okay, I'm gonna do it or not do it. It just, for me, absolutely the timing was right. When I learned of Justice Zager's retirement, I discerned about it for the weekend, talked to a lot of people, have since been talking to a lot of people about it, and for me, again, it's just, the timing is absolutely right for me to put my name in and see how this process works and see how it turns out. I have motivation and skill and experience. I've practiced law full-time for 25 years. As a single mom for the past 10 years, I've raised 2 awesome kids, and I have to give credit to their dad in that process. I've managed time for family, friends, church, and provided service on commissions and boards. And I think I've really developed a lot of relationships with a lot of lawyers in the state of Iowa. So my hope is that if I made it out of the commission or as a justice, that I would be able to hit the ground running with those relationships, but also with the confidence of the bar and the public in serving. So I know you get thanked time and time again for your service and time, but I having been on the other side, I really do appreciate everybody's time and commitment. So,
Thank you, Ms. Dickson.
thank you.
Ms. Pearson, you have any questions?
I just want to thank her for her time last evening.
Oh,
Okay.
Very good conversation.
thank you.
Ms. Bowden?
Yes, thank you. Yes, thank you also for your application. You have extensive practice in workers' compensation, so my question is two parts. One, how would that assist someone like yourself to be a Supreme Court justice? And is it a disadvantage? And if so, how would you overcome that disadvantage?
Well, I'll start with the disadvantage first. And again, if you looking over the applications, there is a tremendous amount of applicants with different focus areas. So you have family law, you've got federal criminal procedure, you've got patent law, you have corporate law, and here, in my case, it's workers' compensation. To overcome that, I think, is truly the willingness to devote yourself to time and attention in researching those new areas of law. I mean, it's sad, not unfortunately, or it's not really unfortunate, but you're just not going to have general practitioners, and you may, but by the time you hit that 25-year milestone, it's just impossible to be a specialist of everything. So I do think, but I think the willingness, and maybe that goes to the humility aspect, to know that you don't know everything, and the willingness to learn that, other than to assume, well, oh, I tried a jury trial back in 1998, so I know how this works. I don't really need to re-familiarize myself with that procedure. And then in terms of the advantages, and I did lay that out in my application, is I do have a lot of experience in administrative law. I didn't really work in the process of when the law changed last year, but I certainly participated in a lot of meetings and conversations about the recent changes in Iowa's Workers' Compensation Act. And I think I know that law really well. I'm sort of, I don't want to say an expert, but I served as an expert witness, so I guess I kind of have been. I take a lot of questions all over the state on that area, so I think I would bring that to the table.
Thank you.
Mr. Berger? Mr. Diaz? Dr. Taylor? Mr. Bevel?
Ms. Dickson, how did you end up doing so much workers' comp?
Well, when I started at Betty Newman, it was a insurance defense firm, and over time, I started doing more workers' compensation, and as you do more workers' compensation, your name gets out, so you get more files. As you get more files, your name gets out, you become more of a specialist, you get more files, and just over time, that's how it evolved. I have a partner with whom she started 3 months before me. She's written a letter on my behalf, and she's a tremendous civil and employment rights attorney. And or employer's rights on behalf of the employer, I want to clarify. Same thing with her. Like she does a tremendous amount of that work, and I think a lot of it is just you do the work, your name gets out, you get more cases, and then you do more cases and your name gets out. And it's not when I started at law school, or when I started at Betty Newman in 1993. I honestly, I didn't ever say I'm going to grow up and I'm going to be a workers' compensation attorney. But it's been great. I love practicing in this state, and the bar for the workers' compensation bar, the doctors, the administrative law judges. It's a very collegial profession. People really get along. When they don't, they stand out. So it's been a good way to, I always say, raise a family.
Ms. Sinclair? Ms. Stigma?
No, thank you.
Mr. Suka?
Yes, good afternoon.
Hello.
Looks like you have quite a bit of experience before the appeals in Supreme Court. What was your best experience and what was your worst?
Oh my gosh, did you really ask me about my worst experience? I can't believe you did that. So this is my worst experience. This is on the cover page. I can't believe you asked that question. This was on the front page of the Quad City Times from 1998. I was a young lawyer, and it says, for those of you that can't read it, it says one supreme stumble. It was the spring of 1998. I had just had my first child, and I went out to Dubuque to argue an appeal. And the press was there. That's when they weren't doing it all the time, but the press was there because the Supreme Court was there. And it was a application for further review, Ackerman versus American Cyanamid, where both sides appealed the Court of Appeals decision. So we didn't really know why the court had accepted the application for further review. So I got up there and so I called the clerk and I'm like, who goes first? And they said, you go first. So I started my argument relying on a prior case, and I'm sorry that I just have it was American Cyanamid or Clubine versus American Cyanamid, and argued a point of law, and Justice Harris interrupted me and said, counsel, that's not what we held in Clubine versus American Cyanamid, and I froze. Like, I just froze. I didn't know what to say, because I was like, no, this is my whole argument is because you argue, this is what you meant in Clubine versus American Cyanamid. And so I lost my wording, and I tripped over my words, and they were very kind. The court was tremendously kind. And I think it was Justice, I have my notes, but one of the justices came up Justice Lavarado came up afterwards and said, don't worry about it, you did fine, it happens to everybody. The press picked it up and put it in the paper the next day. So that would probably be my
Do you want
worst.
to finish with your best experience?
Yeah. And I have 5 minutes left. It's just a great story, and I brought this with me, but I was like, I'm not going to bring it unless somebody asks the right question. And then my best experience would probably be again, I think it's fun to do when we're on the road. So this one was at Drake University, and it was Morello versus Blackhawk Foundry, and I was pregnant with my first child, and it just went really well. Like, again, same thing. The justice asked me a question about a holding in a prior case, but that time I nailed it. So.
Mr. Goodman?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Dickson, thank you for your application. I enjoyed our visit, and you mentioned today that you were on the 2010 commission, and as you can imagine, we have the daunting task of looking at 20 excellent resumes and careers before us and picking the 3 most qualified applicants. The reason that brought us here today is different than the reason that brought you to this commission in 2010. We have to pick 3 from which the governor will pick 1, and back in 2010 you had the large task of picking 9 to fill 3 positions. What I'd like to know from you is what guidance can you give this commission in light of the fact that we have 8 private practitioners, 2 federal prosecutors, 1 state's attorney, 8 judges, a corporate lawyer. What criteria should we apply for this position, which is the highest court position in the state? And I ask that within the context of not what should we look for in a judge, but what should we look for in a justice that sits and makes the final decision for the people of the state of Iowa.
I really think you go back to the criteria almost in your training guidelines. I don't think, my opinion really is that this commission comes up with the 3 most qualified candidates for the governor, and the governor can decide if all things equal, the governor can look at factors, whether it should be a trial judge or it should geography or all those things. I really think you look at the issue, temperament, integrity is so huge, so important to have the trust with the courts and sort of the political climate right now. I mean, the Supreme Court is sort of the board of directors for the whole judiciary. And so I think integrity is huge. And if that integrity comes from private practice versus the district court or whatever, I'd say that's very important. Then you get into temperament, writing and researching. I do think you're the commission that's sort of charged with making sure that we say who we say we are, that we really are whatever our application or whatever we try to present ourselves to be. That's kind of the job that you do so that the governor doesn't have to do it.
Okay, thank you very much.
Mr. Bloom?
Just one quick question. So I think you are one of 2 applicants who are currently serving on a large school board, and I'm just curious if your experience in that has provided you any insights on juveniles and their interface with criminal justice, and it sort of rolls into the schools too with policy and discipline in that.
Yeah, it's a huge issue right now because of the climate with the school security and school shootings. totally balancing the interest of it, to run a school versus, how do you keep the schools safe? We don't really have an answer for that, but I know we've had, it comes up at almost every meeting. And after that, the school shooting down in Florida, we had, the school even had, we've got kids that come and talk. I mean, PV is a great school district to work for, or I guess I should say to represent, but that's probably where it comes across the most.
Thank you.
I think we're out of time. Is there one question over there, since we're running a little ahead, that someone wants to ask or needs to ask? Okay, thank you, Ms. Dickson,
All
for
right.
coming, and I wish you the best of luck.
Okay, thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.
And if you want to leave that article, we'll take it, you know.
Oh, yeah.
No,